During the worst winters of World War II, millions of civilians across Europe faced nights so cold that, honestly, survival itself became uncertain. Fuel was rationed, coal shipments were bombed, electricity failed, and entire cities were left with little more than scavenged wood. Yet folks survived nights well below freezing using a method that seems almost impossible today. A single log burned slowly through the entire night. This was not folklore or exaggeration. It was the result of a heating system refined over generations and quietly relied upon during the war when nothing else worked. What modern viewers often miss is that wartime survival was not about comfort. It was about efficiency, heat retention, and, controlling airflow. The civilians who endured those winters were not burning more fuel. They were burning smarter. Understanding how they did it reveals a heating principle modern homes have largely abandoned in favour of constant fuel consumption. The secret was not the fire itself, but how the heat was captured and stored. The key to this system was the masonry stove, known by different names across Europe, including tiled stoves in Germany, masonry heaters in Scandinavia, and peasant stoves throughout Eastern Europe. These were not fireplaces designed for ambiance. They were thermal batteries built from brick, stone, or tile, engineered to absorb intense heat quickly and release it slowly over many hours. Instead of feeding a fire all night, civilians burned one dense log or a tightly packed bundle of wood at high temperature for a short period. The heat from that fast, hot burn was pulled into the mass of the stove through a maze of internal channels. Smoke did not rush up a chimney. It travelled slowly through stone passages, transferring nearly all its heat before exiting. By the time the fire was out, the stove itself had become a warm object, radiating steady heat into the room for 8 to 12 hours. Wartime shortages forced people to rediscover forgotten efficiency. By the early 1940s, coal and gas were scarce across occupied and bombed regions. As the situation grew more desperate, civilians, they reverted to older heating systems that had, fallen out of fashion during industrialization. In both apartments and rural homes, masonry stoves were brought back into service because, quite simply, they required dramatically less fuel. One log worked because, really, the system avoided constant heat loss. See, fireplaces lose most of their heat up the chimney, and thin metal stoves, they cool rapidly once the fire dies. Masonry stoves solve both problems by sealing airflow and storing heat in mass rather than metal. Families learned to burn their fuel in the early evening, which allowed the stove to saturate with heat before bedtime. By morning, rooms were still warm enough to prevent freezing pipes, frostbite, or even hypothermia. The design worked because it respected physics instead of fighting it. Heat naturally rises and disperses. The World War II-era stove worked by slowing this process. Thick walls absorbed energy and released it gradually through radiation, not convection. That meant no drafts, no temperature swings, and no wasted heat. Airflow control was essential. Dampers sealed the stove once combustion ended, trapping warmth inside the mass. This prevented warm air from being pulled out of the home overnight, a mistake many modern heating systems still make. The result was, well, even warmth without the need for constant fuel input. Civilians often slept near these stoves, dried their clothing on them, and cooked simple meals using the residual heat, even hours after the fire had burned out. Modern homes, abandoned this system mainly for convenience, not because it didn't perform well. After the war, cheap fuel and centralized heating made masonry stoves seem, I suppose, a bit outdated. Thin walls, forced air systems, and constant heating took the place of thermal mass and those intermittent burns. The trade-off, really, was higher energy consumption and a lot more heat loss. Today, most homes rely on systems that must run continuously to maintain temperature. If power fails or fuel is cut, heat disappears almost immediately. WWII civilians lived with systems that assumed scarcity and, well, planned for it. What modern builders forgot is that efficiency is not about automation. It's about design that works even when supply fails. The principles can still be applied without rebuilding a wartime stove. You do not need to install a full masonry heater to benefit from this knowledge. The principle is heat storage and controlled release. Adding thermal mass near heat sources like brick walls or stone hearths increases efficiency. Sealing airflow after heating, prevents overnight heat loss. Burning fuel hot and fast instead of slow and smoky really improves heat capture. Even modern wood stoves that mimic masonry designs show dramatically higher efficiency because they apply the same World War II lessons: burn clean, store heat, and release it slowly. Survival-minded builders often rediscover these principles when designing off-grid homes or emergency shelters. The wartime civilian experience proves these systems work not just in theory, but under the worst possible conditions. This forgotten system kept people alive when nothing else could. Civilians did not survive frozen nights because they were tougher or luckier. They survived because they understood heat as a resource to be captured, stored, and protected. One log was enough because the system wasted nothing. In an era where energy insecurity is once again a concern, these lessons are no longer historical curiosities. They are reminders that some of the most effective technologies are not new. They are simply remembered. If this kind of deep historical survival knowledge matters to you, subscribe to the channel and share this video with others who value real-world lessons from the past. History still has a lot to teach us, especially when comfort disappears and survival becomes the priority.